Right now. All right, let's make a formal introduction for our listeners. Good afternoon, Jeffrey. My name is Claudio, and I'm calling you from Washington, D.C., from the studios in Fairfax City. We're very humble and grateful that Jeffrey Ericson Allen accepted our invitation to our show. Jeffrey, welcome to the show, man.
It's a pleasure to be here, Claudio. Thank you for inviting me.
No problem. The pleasure is mine. Let's go back to the beginning of your life. Jeffrey, were you born like in a musical family? You know, how long were you when you perhaps began taking, I don't know, guitar lesson, piano lesson?
Well, my musical education began with my grandfather, who was a classical cellist and also an orchestra and band leader. He had a very fine musical education in Chicago in the 1920s, and he was also my best friend when I was growing up. I was very closely bonded with my grandfather, and at the age of 8, he became my first cello teacher. And it's been a love affair with that instrument these 57 ensuing years. But of course, music has led me to many other different forms, different instruments. I've collected quite a few acoustic instruments over the years and studied a bit of keyboard, enough to go along with the theory that I know. I did study music at the University of Oregon School of Music, and that was in my early 20s. But I was on my way toward being a classical performer when I had an injury and had to stop playing. And it gave me some pause. In retrospect, it probably was a good thing because I filled in other parts of my life. As an undergraduate, I was a philosophy major.
Perfect, yeah.
And that was something that I think has consistently informed my musical life and my compositions. Looking back on different pieces I've created, so many of them are informed by either mythological or philosophical concepts. So I think a composer needs some kind of foundation, a human foundation on which to establish their music. So I have, even though I pursued a career as a librarian for many years, I always continued to compose and play. And my experiences were fairly varied. I worked with a group called Confluence, which was guitar, cello, flute, and then sometimes harp, sometimes percussion. And that was sort of a Windham Hill folk jazz sort of style ensemble. But I got a lot of experience with improvisation with that. And that has been a benefit to me as a performer and also as a composer. Because in many ways, composing is a form of improvisation that happens not necessarily in real time, but it's a way of stimulating the inventio. That's a significant part of the life of composing. And following some of the people who investigate rhetoric, musical rhetoric, the other parts of that formula, the dispositio, which is the structuring of a piece, and the elocutio, which is the expression. I sort of follow these parallels in my playing as a musician and also as a composer. So especially these last few years where I've been focusing on both electronic music on the one hand and early music, music from the 16th through 18th century, I find that improvisation has become a significant part of my process. So I'm never finished with my musical education. I'm a lifelong learner. I think you can see in the background, besides my cello, there is a viola da gamba, which is my latest acquisition, and is providing me with some new challenges in playing, but also some new opportunities to hear and understand some of our European musical heritage that is really important to me. So I do have, besides the European classical heritage and traditions in my work, you can probably hear in my work that there are Eastern inflections as well. So, pardon me?
No, go ahead. Perfect, great.
So, for example, I've studied a bit of some instruments like the shakuhachi and the Japanese koto, which is their long zither. Studied with a Japanese master for a number of years. And those studies were very valuable for me in opening my ear and my mind to some other formats and forms of music that I have tried to give expression to in my compositions. So as far as the background with theater and with dance, that's also been just a really important part of my musical life. I've had the opportunity to collaborate with some marvelous theater directors and choreographers who in many ways give a kind of visual and kinesthetic sense to music that I would like to bring to the stage, and I've had plenty of opportunities to do that. I'd say that in many ways that my music in general is very visual. It does tend to evoke a lot of visual imagery, and it's also very much concerned with storytelling. So my career as a children's librarian and a storyteller has helped inform my musical creation by giving a framework and a point of reference for a composition. I feel that I'm always trying to tell a story in my music.
That's great. That's great. Let me ask you a question. At the beginning, your parent, they saw you playing with grandpa, learning music and so on and so forth. But any pressure from your dad, your mom saying, hey, forget about music, you're not going to make any money, it's a complicated, you need to do a bachelor or a master, become a conductor, and probably one of 1,000 will make it into the world. Any pressure to do that? Forget about music, go to engineer, go to medical school, law, whatever you forget, or you want.
Well, that's a very good question. As I have tended to pick things. My interests have ranged in areas that are, generally speaking, not so practical.
Yeah,
I was a philosophy major.
Yeah, wow.
Now, I got a dual message from my parents. My mother said, "Oh, I think that's wonderful. You've always thought about life and the great questions." And my father was more, what are you going to do with that?
Yeah.
When I was heading toward music more, again, a bit of a split message. My mother more on the side of, well, do what you love to do, and the way of living will follow from it. That was her belief. She had a lot of faith in that. Whereas my father, a very practical man, he really taught me a lot about being engaged with the nitty-gritty realities of life. And I appreciate that so very much. But, you know, he would ask challenging questions about those things. And the truth is, you know, as a cellist, I probably could not have made my way as a classical cellist. I did not, I don't think that I had the sufficient kind of internal and kind of just natural talent that one needs for that. I put in a lot of work, and I don't know what would have happened had I, you know, been able and had I continued with that. But, you know, your question is one that I think every musician has to, you know, has to face. You get all kinds of messages, not only from parents, but from the society. And I think in the end, if music is the arrow that, you know, the Cupid's arrow that has struck your heart, you have very little choice. You must follow that in some way. So I have chosen to follow it with as a joyful avocation. And of course, now that I'm retired, I'm absolutely free to pursue whatever musical interests I have joyfully, whether or not they entail any kind of financial remuneration. I don't care about that anymore. That makes no difference. I'm engaged now in, I've been going back to school. I'm taking graduate courses in early music. And
good for you, man. Yeah.
Finding it just a wonderful opportunity to immerse myself in this beautiful and sophisticated sound world, and also to be engaged with these young people who are so intelligent and so enthusiastic about it. You know, they really give me hope. And I think we, you know, sometimes we look at younger people and say, oh, what's the world coming to? But when I look at these young people and interact with them, I think, you know, they're all right. These kids are really onto something. And again, they're at the point of their life where they're following their bliss.
Absolutely. Yeah. We like we talked before, right? So we live in, you know, in crazy times nowadays with all the wars and all the things that are happening on the news on a daily basis. But music can, at least for me, has given me so much satisfaction. I'm very lucky that I was born with my dad that had a lot of cinema and music, and I knew back then that I wasn't interested in learning music, right, or going to musical school or classical music or learn how to read music or pick up a guitar. I knew that I want to listen to it, and I came from a family of engineers. So when I came here to study, to stay to study, I knew that I wanted to be an engineer. I was supposed good at math and physics, that kind of stuff, but music has always been an important part of my life. Is and continue. I had a lot of music, and I mean a lot of music. Yeah, and I go to close to, as I said before, 50 or 60 or 70 shows a year. So I'm very lucky that where I live, every band comes this way. I live in the border with Washington, D.C. and Maryland, and I mean every band comes this way because it's a very lucrative business for them. So being classical, being jazz, being rock, electronic music, and atmospheric music, everybody comes away. So I'm very lucky that I'm able to do that, and that, you know, I pick a profession which is I study computer science, which is a very lucrative field, and there's a lot of work out there. So I get paid well, and I'm very lucky to be in this country and to be able to enjoy the stuff. You know, so many people, you know, wake up on a Monday morning, man, I need to go to my job again, or I hate my boss. For me, it's the opposite. I'm very lucky. I wake up early. I do what I like. You know, I move companies every 4 or 5 years, and then I'm able to listen to a lot of music and buy a lot of music, you know. So
Yeah.
I'm very
listening, as we were speaking before, I think is, and listening with really open ears, really hearing what is there in the music and having many points of reference from which to understand and judge and experience a piece of music, it is absolutely critical. You're the kind of listener that every composer wants.
and I thank you, and I put attention, right? So, like nowadays, no judge, no, moral judgment one way or another. People are different, but people can download a PDF or can buy a book, right, and read the book and turn pages. So people can download music from the internet or MP3. They listen 10 seconds, go to the next one, 10 seconds, next one. So they listen to a whole album in a minute or so. For me, that, it's a kind of foolish way of living life. I open the CD, I take a look at the picture, an album, turn it and listen to the picture, read the lyrics and the credits. Kind of smell. It's like a beautiful thing to open a vinyl, take the plastic thing, or the CD you open with a little knife, and I don't know. That's who I am, and I during the COVID, right, during the pandemic, I kind of, in a way, well, it's foolish for me to say that it happens, but because a lot of people die. But for me, was a great opportunity to examine my life and see what was important. I was going very fast in my life without thinking, well, I like that, or I don't like that, or I like the kind of project or this. I was working hard, listen to music a couple hours evening, go to bed, and I start smelling the roses, and examine what was important in my life. So, and then during the period, I opened one radio, and I opened another one. I sent the link to friends, and I began with the podcast. I thought, touring musicians are obviously not touring with the colleagues. Everybody must be at home bored. So I started calling people, and the rest is history. So I got.
That was wonderful. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you took that opportunity to be reflective, and I think a lot of people did.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. For me, that period of time, at least with my composing activities, involved a lot of self-doubt. I was working on a project, the album project previous to my most recent release called Gnosis.
Yeah.
And this is an album project which was based on Hellenistic philosophy, essentially. Most of the tracks reflecting epistemological ideas and trying to translate that into music. I had what I thought was a complete album. I left it aside for a while. When I came back to it, it didn't work for me at all. I felt like I had to strip almost all the tracks back to their bare bones and then gradually add back what was truly meaningful. And I think that was sort of the experience of the pandemic for a lot of people. There was a stripping away to kind of what's bare bones and essential in life, and then to add back what one really can feel is their own true expression. And so when I reimagined that piece, I was able to recreate it much, much better. It really finally reflected my initial vision. But I think it was the project that gave me the most angst, the most sense of self-doubt. But it was really good for me. And I have to say that Spotted Peccary's Deborah Martin was so helpful to me in conversations. She was so supportive in helping me to reimagine and redo my project. So I thank her and the other people on the label for that kind of support.
Yeah, absolutely. And the kudos to Spotted Peccary. I had the opportunity to interview them and several musicians associated with the record label, and it's a very, very well run, very decent family of musicians, if you will. They try, of course, break even, try a little bit of money, but the quality of the recording with Howard and master engineering, the quality of the cover and the visual, the text that they use is very well run. It's you can tell right away, right? There's something good enough, right? So, like for example, I don't know, like a Starbucks, right? So you go to Starbucks, you can sit down, the bathrooms are clean, it's a good atmosphere. You pay, I don't know, $5 a coffee, but it's experience as opposed to going to a drive-through very bad coffee and you pay $1.50, right? So this is like the Starbucks, if you will, of the maybe Starbucks should promote this podcast now that I'm talking about that. It's a very well run company, well run by very decent people. I have the opportunity to interview, record producer, promoters, and in all ways of life, and there are many bad people. The way that they rip off, the people that end up creating, in this case, musicians or writers. So I'm glad that you are associated with that record label. Have you ever thought about?
All artists. They are all artists themselves.
Absolutely.
And have recorded wonderful albums for the label. So they absolutely understand every stage of the process, and they support and appreciate that. So I'm so grateful to have been, to be associated with them.
Absolutely, completely. Have you ever thought in your wildest dream where you were growing up, having the conversation with your dad about, hey, maybe music is not the way to make it, or read philosophy books, it's okay, but go to medical school. And now you have been featured on syndicated radio show, including the Outer Space, End, and so on and so forth. Man, it's not bad, huh? No, not too bad, huh?
Yeah, well, he did live long enough to see the beginnings of this kind of, modicum of success that I have enjoyed. And he also really had, expressed a lot of appreciation to me about that, and gratitude. Gratitude to him for his practical wisdom in life. And feedback to me for also continuing to, keep in whatever way I could following my own, dreams as an artist and as a philosopher.
Yep. Perhaps music in kind of philosophical terms, lamer term, maybe music has chosen you, not the other way around, right? So you didn't have an option, maybe, maybe that was the way.
The poet Rilke exchanged some letters with a younger poet. It's a marvelous short book called Letters to a Young Poet. And one of the things that Rilke, one of the phrases he uses in speaking to this poet is what he called innere Notwendigkeit, inner necessity.
Right.
He said, you must write from this inner necessity. Everything else is worthless and a waste of time. And I think that's true in music. I think you must find what is your inner necessity. There must be almost a feeling of inward pressure, a sense of almost like something boiling up.
Absolutely,
to erupt into something that is really, expressive and meaningful and carries emotion and thought. And I am not a composer who focuses only on the emotional. That is a component of what I do, but to me, music is a much bigger container, and it includes, musical idea and the working out and development of musical idea as not only a carrier of feeling, but as a carrier of thought or an expression of thought.
Absolutely. As I say before, music wasn't my calling as a musician, but it was my calling as a consumer of the product called music, So, many families, they put pressure on the kids to, hey, study. We don't have a medical, we never have a doctor in the family. You should study medicine, or you should study that kind of foolish too, I have a 20-year-old boy now, and you need to do well in life. It isn't this university or that university. You will fail stand up like I did fail stand up, but pick what you like, and then do go to master's school and get a couple of degrees. No family pressure. We have put some money aside for you to do whatever you want in life. What you're calling, no, it's your life. I'm not going to. I'm as a dad, right? I will expose you to art, to music, to travel, to another language, to see the world. But at the end of the day, it's your life or her life, whatever. Me as a parent, I'm not going to live your life. I will enhance you and help you to do whatever you like in your life. And failing is okay. Picking a second career is okay.
Yep. Those are just the kind of messages that our children need.
Yeah.
Coincidentally, I was just reading in the treatise by Joachim Klantz in the 18th century. He's talking about musical education, and he says essentially to noblemen, as parents, if your son or daughter is called to music, support them. Give them the opportunity. Don't force them into something that they don't want to do. Let them blossom. And I think that was so wonderful that he wrote that in the 18th century.
Absolutely. I don't want my little son to be a Claudio. I want for him to be him. Look at the mirror, see what is appealing to you, and face the music, so to speak. See what is your calling within yourself, and failing or starting all over again, it's fine. It's a wonderful country that gives the opportunity to, like it did. It has given me to do well in life with pretty much nothing. I'm the American dream alive, so I'm very, very pleased to be a U.S. citizen and have done well in this country, giving me a second opportunity. I was very poor. I will get emotional if I think about stuff, but I have done okay. So
Wonderful.
So let's talk a little bit about what I was reading in your biography that you also enjoy, as you said before, the theater and dance, collaborated with several modern dance group and theater. Have any of this composition? What's the process? You kind of create something that could be applied to theater, or theater companies that they know you by your reputation kind of approach you and they will say, hey, we would like to do something like that in the next 2 years. What do you recommend? How does it work?
Well, fortunately, I've been engaged almost exclusively in projects that are true co-creations.
Yeah.
In other words, for dance, I've never been asked by a choreographer to provide a score at the beginning and that to which they would work. It's always been a give and take process. So, for example, in my collaborations with Bonnie Samoa here in Eugene, she's a marvelous modern dancer and choreographer. We gave ourselves the opportunity to allow projects to develop very conversationally and organically. So we'd get together, we'd talk about the concept of the piece. More often than not, we would go first to her dance studio. And she would say, well, some of these movements are emerging already. Some of these gestures seem to be forming. And I would say, wonderful. And then I'd go back and would come and do some work here. And then she'd come to my studio. And I said, well, here are some musical responses to that. And then the two of us might structure the work together in various parts, even determining the length of each section. And then the very difficult work of forming the composition according to that plan. bringing it back to the studio, her dance studio, seeing if that works or if it needs to be adjusted. In some cases, we scrapped the original musical idea or dance idea and started anew, and it always improved the piece. Another example was in the theater. I worked with a theater director who we were working with some ancient materials based on the Sumerian myth of the descent of Inanna into the underworld. This is probably the world's oldest written myth. It's 5,000 years old in, wow, cuneiform, on these cuneiform tablets. And Catherine van der Tuin and I explored this wonderful story about how Inanna, the queen of heaven, descends to the underworld to meet her dark sister, Ereshkigal. And she is ritually first stripped of all of her wonderful raiments as she comes down to the underworld. And finally, she's turned into a corpse and hung on a hook to later be rescued by these empathetic spirits who bubble up out of the ground, sent by a god Enki, who is the god of music and the god of empathy. We also worked with Madonna Holden, who was a marvelous poet, who reset these stories to a contemporary poetic sense and structure. And the three of us collaborated back and forth with dialogue, trialogue, and then working with actors. They came into this, and this is not the usual production schedule for an acting troupe to spend 2 years developing a piece. That's almost unheard of. But the actors themselves provided all kinds of feedback and interaction. And so when we finally produced this piece, The Descent of Inanna, I think that what we made, it was its own form. It was part opera, part theater. It was all masked. Everything was done with masks. So it had elements, that were ancient. It had an electronic and acoustic score. Some parts were played live, some parts were recorded. And so this kind of collaboration gives me a lot of juice. I as a composer and just as a human being, it's exciting to work on projects like this. And it's rare to have the opportunity to spend this much time in the collaborative process. I've really, really benefited from it, and I hope given much back in return.
Absolutely. Is that those compositions have been they were recorded? They're
yes. I actually I released an album, self-released an album called The Descent of Inanna.
Okay, I wanted to check it out. Yeah.
That has versions of, it has, I think, 12 to 15 tracks of versions of scenes. Now, I had to change that to make it work as an album, of course.
Absolutely, yeah, right.
But the story essentially does unfold in the recording. Yeah. So, I think that too has been something that has stuck with me in my process of creating and assembling albums. I am not just assembling tracks, but always trying to tell an overarching story that takes the listener on a journey.
Absolutely, yeah.
In these days when so many people, they're streaming things and they just listen to this track or that track, I think, well, they're missing an essential experience sometimes when the album has more of an overarching structure and a story to tell. I always hope that my listeners will want to listen in order to the pieces that I've written that have a trajectory.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. But again, that is something that is I'm going against the grain of our very sort of ADHD society, which is this thing, that thing, a lot of disconnected things. I am looking for something more organic, something more connected, something that has a longer story.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You must like Philip Glass, I imagine, as well, right? Or not much?
Nah, so. Actually, some of the other minimalists attract me a lot more. Steve Reich, for example, I think is a far better composer. He has not been as popular, but if you listen to a piece like Tehillim, which is a Hebrew word for praises, that piece, using these minimal foundation, these motifs, builds something that is extraordinary. There are other minimalist composers I could name who do a little bit more for me. On the other hand, the pieces that Glass did for those films that really made his career, I think, popularly, beautifully tied to the visual. So full props to him for that, but he's not my favorite minimalist composer.
I got it. What's the name of? I have several. Journeyscapes, I think is one, right. And the other one there. They were very good because if you combine that with the image, right? I think folks, working on the field, climbing the mountains and music in the background is a beautiful thing, man. Which is your favorite minimalist? You say it's not my favorite.
I would probably, in some ways, Terry Riley, who was one of the early pioneers of minimalism, with the influence he came under Eastern music, they're all very, very appealing to me. I think he was building this from the ground up. No one else was really doing that. But I would mention him in particular as being important to that. Although, again, I am not a minimalist in my methods. I borrow some techniques from the minimalists. So, for example, quite frequently in my pieces, there is a recurring ostinato that is introduced at the beginning and runs through the length of the piece. An example, on the current recording Chronology, the very opening track, Unwinding the Dream, has this very sort of sparkly ostinato figure, which to me represents two things: the ongoing march of time, that it is something inexorable is carrying us forward, and that there is an essential vitality, a kind of élan vital, which is a part of that. But that is used as a foundation on which to lay a very long sustained melody, to layer harmonies. It's essentially kind of a passacaglia, I would say, formally. But this is a recurrent feature in my Music as Chronotope project. I have used this device, if you will, on many of my pieces. And it also, to me, exposes what I hope is kind of an underlying philosophy of the whole project, which is this confluence of space and time. And that human beings, there is a kind of a voice that I try to give, the vox humana, which